Good evening, everyone. My name is Cal Alston. I have the great privilege to chair the National Advisory Board for Imagining America, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone here tonight for an important part of our annual gatherings, the celebration of the Randy Martin Spirit Award, named for one of our late great comrades, Randy Martin. Randy was a force of energy, generosity, and grace. His creative and intellectual and political energy was indispensable to IA and to the National Advisory Board. This is not even to list all of his contributions to Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, where he founded Art and Public Policy. He was a dancer and a scholar, and he truly embodied an understanding of art activism and the public. And we at IA have committed to remember him in our practices, our movements, and in this award. A brief quote from Randy from Lateral Moves Across the Discipline, a conversation that was published in Public, Volume 4, Number 1. The underlying claim we're making with respect to activism, critical politics, and the arts is that, in fact, there isn't a crisis of art or a crisis of politics. There's a crisis of evaluation. Statistically, it's hard to come up with a measure of the arts sector that sees it as being less than it once was. There certainly is more of it, and I would say the same thing of arts politics. There are more domains of human activity and expression, more objects of political contestation than there have ever been, and there are material and institutional expressions of that proliferation, as we see in the historic growth of non-governmental organizations and the not-for-profit sector. This proliferation filters down very specifically into people's experience. The dilemma someone making art faces today is how to elaborate the significance of his or her work beyond the immediate discussion of it. The Arts Politics program is meant to give them a framework to imagine what is the outside, the beyond their work, so that they might move in those directions. With great joy, we honor Randy Martin's spirit tonight with the presentation by the 2019 awardee and the announcement of our 2020 awardee. Before we start, want to just remind you that this is in webinar format, so you should feel free to submit questions into the Q&A box that's at the bottom, the icons at the bottom of your screen, or to put it into the chat if you would like. And with that, I want to introduce Wood Delahousse, a New Orleans native and part of our great cultural organization and partner, Ashe. He's also a member of the National Advisory Board, and for the last 2 years, he's been the chair of the Randy Martin Spirit Award Committee. And I would like to invite him to introduce the main program.
Thank you so much, Cal. Greetings, family, and welcome again to another evening of movement building, agitating, and a collective reimagining of multiple systems, structures, and ways of being that shape our existence. I had the distinct pleasure to engage with our speaker this evening when she served as the Chief Policy Agitator for the United States Department of Arts and Culture, where she was and still is truly a force to be reckoned with. Arlene Goldbard is a writer, speaker, consultant, visual artist, and cultural activist whose focus is at the intersection of culture, politics, and spirituality. She was born in New York and grew up near San Francisco, but currently lives in New Mexico, so handling the map. Her two newest books on art's public purpose, The Wave and the Cultural Possibility, Art, Artists in the Future, were published in the spring of 2013. Prior books include New Creative Community, The Art of Cultural Development, Community, Culture, and Globalization, and an international anthology published by the Rockefeller Foundation. Crossroads, Reflections on the Politics of Culture and Clarity, a novel. Her essays have been published in numerous journals. She has addressed many academic and community audiences in the United States and Europe on topics ranging from the ethics of community arts practice to the development of cultural policy. She has provided advice and counsel to hundreds of community-based organizations, independent media groups, higher education institutions, and public and private funders and policymakers, including myself. So it is my distinct pleasure and privilege to present Arlene Goldbard.
Thank you so much, Wood. I love to hear myself be introduced because I sound so much better than I really am. But in this case, since I've received an award, I just want to express my gratitude to Cal and Wood and the entire National Advisory Board and staff of IA. I'm so honored to be in the line of people descending from Randy Martin. If I had a red nose, I would put one on right now to show you how grateful I am. My aim in this session is to follow one specific thread in the tapestry of cultural organizing since the 1970s, specifically artists and activists, including myself, trying to bring about a new WPA. We were inspired by the Federal Works Progress Administration of the 1930s, which employed people to rebuild physical and cultural infrastructure at a greatly stressed time in our collective history. So I'm going to invite you to stroll down memory lane with me and then open things up to my friends, Caron Atlas and Jeff Chang, who will have observations and questions of their own, especially on what seems to me to be the challenge of the day, which is building a movement for a new WPA should Biden be elected. And I'm going to cross my fingers on that. One note but I just want to offer before I start is that, the WPA was highly imperfect. Amazing accomplishments, major pitfalls. I'm not idealizing it. There are lots of people who write about its achievements and shortcomings, and I commend you to read some of those. There's also a kind of a bibliography in one of the documents that IA sent out before my talk today. I really want to focus on what now. In doing that, I'm inspired by John Berger's observation that the past is not for living in. It is a well of conclusions from which we draw in order to act. This is my favorite quote from Ways of Seeing. And my question is, what can we learn from this aspect of the past about how to act now? From 1971 to 73, I worked as a designer and printer for the San Francisco Art Commission's Neighborhood Arts Program. That was a city agency started in the 60s to engage people in neighborhood-based creative projects. I turned out tons of mimeograph flyers like these for art workshops and poetry readings, plays, and concerts in San Francisco neighborhoods. And by doing that, I got to know many, many people involved in community-based arts work. The 70s were a really interesting time in Bay Area cultural organizing. A lot of artists thought we should have a say in cultural policy and cultural funding. During those years, I was an organizer for the San Francisco Art Workers Coalition. This is my little graphic too. You can imagine the spirit of the times there. That was a group of artists from many disciplines and practices. We had performing artists from the San Francisco Mime Troupe, the Pickle Family Circus, lots of other performing groups, community muralists, community gardeners, musicians, filmmakers, but we all came together to focus on accountability for public cultural spending and policy. For example, we did a study of the trustees of the fine arts museums. They were taxpayer-funded institutions in San Francisco that operated like a private business. We mapped all their interlocking business interests and their indifference to culture, and we met with the trustees in July of 1976 to demand changes. The next slide is going to show you a close-up. I love the third quote from the trustee. I can see quite clearly that there are two completely different perspectives of the institution in this room. I and the other directors hold one, you hold another. Absolutely. You'll be unsurprised to learn that we didn't get what we wanted from the museum, but before any of that happened, we started the newsletter that you've seen in the last two slides. Our impetus was the upcoming bicentennial of the American Revolution in 1976, which was being lavishly funded to create an idea of America that we found altogether too white, male, straight, and right-wing. So the first project was to create an alternative People's Bicentennial. But beyond that and after that, the biweekly covered a vast range of cultural organizing. And the entire thing was researched, written, and produced by artists volunteering just because we thought it was important to stand for the public interest in culture. Here, and the next slide are Jeff Hoyle and Larry Pizzoni of the Pickle Family Circus, one of the groups that got in on the ground floor of the phenomenon that became CETA Arts Jobs, the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. It got to San Francisco through a guy called John Kreidler, who had interned at the Office of Management and Budget in DC. He came to work at the Neighborhood Arts Program with the idea that what he'd heard about in Washington could be applied to community arts. I want to read you a few lines from an issue of the Biweekly in January 1975. Quote, unemployed artists are being hired with federal funds in San Francisco in a program reminiscent of the WPA during the 1930s Depression. This week, 23 artists began work at the Neighborhood Arts Program and the DeYoung Museum Art School. They're being paid approximately $600 a month. That was a living wage, honest to God. Under the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, these jobs are guaranteed for 6 months and can be extended. Another 90 artist positions are expected to open in the next couple of days under the new Emergency Jobs Act signed by President Ford on New Year's Eve. Having this CETA thing pop up catalyzed a huge desire to discover what we could learn from the original WPA, which was a massive relief program created in 1935 by the federal government in response to the Great Depression, when unemployment hit levels unequaled until today in America. We hit that bar again. I guess it's a low bar. It was a general relief program for people from many different types of work. And since the Depression dovetailed with major technological changes, for example, thousands of performers and technicians were put out of work by the move from live theater and music to recordings and films. It ended up being that one of the largest parts of the WPA was Federal One, comprising 5 different programs employing artists. So my fellow organizers and I, back in the day, we began to study and to seek out WPA vets. This was less than 40 years after they had their jobs, so a lot of them were still alive. One high point was meeting with a writer called Francis O'Connor, who had just published a WPA book called Art for the Millions. He told us how after the WPA ended, surplus art project canvases had been baled and sold wholesale to plumbers to wrap up pipes. But the paint melted and gave off a smell, so the bales were tucked away in the back of a warehouse somewhere. And a few decades later, they were discovered. They included pictures by artists who later became famous. There were some Jackson Pollocks in there. I want to quote to you from our interview with O'Connor. He said, O'Connor's advice to CETA artists was, don't let the bureaucrats get their hands on your artwork, lest it suffer the fate of the New York WPA painter's art. He was not optimistic about the present CETA arts program, feeling it would end with this administration and leave artists where they were. He proposed a guaranteed annual income for all citizens, regardless of occupation, rather than specific government art subsidies, which he felt come with too many strings attached. I have to say he had foresight. CETA arts employment hugely expanded through the 70s. I'll read you a snatch of a brief description from a June 1977 biweekly. This is just about one batch of jobs, and there were many jobs. Quote, as of the deadline at 5 p.m. on March 25th, a total of 899 proposals had been received. It appears likely that at least 375 of these will be funded, resulting in about 1,500 public service jobs. Many of these jobs specify artists or are arts related. All of these CETA funded openings will self-destruct in 1 year. Over the span of time, up until 1980, the arts investment from CETA, and CETA funded lots of other jobs, clerks and janitors and all kinds of things. But it equaled just the arts expenditure, about 200 million a year, which would be 400 or 500 million in current dollars. There's some really good CETA documentation available from Linda Fry-Burnham and Steve Durland, who ran the Community Arts Network, which was an amazing resource for the field, now sadly defunct. The picture here shows one of the few books from them that you can find on Kindle if you search for either of their names. So we're going along. It's a moment of jobs, jobs, jobs. When Ronald Reagan took office in 1980, everything changed. Reagan followed a roadmap that was spelled out for him by the right-wing Heritage Foundation, published in their book called Mandate for Leadership. By the time this came out, I had moved to Washington, D.C. as co-director of the Neighborhood Arts Programs National Organizing Committee. The acronym was NAPNOC, and there were like knock, knock, NAPNOC jokes. But we later renamed it the Alliance for Cultural Democracy, ACD. It was begun with a grant from the Department of Labor to study CETA arts jobs. So I was sadly well positioned to see what had been a growing movement, real from the shock of Reagan's election. In those days, you couldn't read an advance copy of Mandate for Leadership to see what their recommendations were unless you actually went to the Heritage Foundation and under their supervision copied out excerpts by hand. And we published that in NAPNOC's newsletters. These were the days when home computers were first emerging. People hadn't yet gotten used to life online. We typed this on an IBM Selectric, believe it or not. We tried to create a network based on mailing these newsletters to a few hundred subscribers around the US. In this time, everyone was desperate for information, which is kind of the opposite of the way things now when TMI is the watchword and we don't know what to pay attention to. One of Reagan's first steps was the elimination of all public service employment overnight. By April of his first year in office, the program had been completely axed. Many artists lost their jobs without warning. It was a huge blow to the community-based arts movement. Until then, every year there were little bits of new money and public programs, and more people were understanding the importance of the work. CETA being cut off so quickly and completely, it was profoundly demoralizing. There was a lull in any sort of national organizing, and though people continued their local work with as much energy as they could muster, it was hard to bring something to a higher level. At ACD, we tried to foment self-consciousness as a movement, self-definition as a movement, and to engage people in dialogue about next steps. But it was really heavy lifting because it was such a demoralizing time. Speaking in another demoralizing time. I stuck it out as long as I could, but eventually I took a pause, turning to writing, painting, speaking, and dreaming rather than organizing. As people began to recover from the Reagan years, there was more energy for policy ideas. So in 1988, when it began to look like Jimmy Carter would succeed Reagan, I co-authored a chapter on cultural democracy, new cultural policy idea, a new cultural policy for the United States. And this was an Institute for Policy Studies book called Winning America, Ideas and Leadership for the 90s, published by South End Press. And one of the things we called for was a new WPA. I didn't really get on my WPA hobby horse again until 2004, after a whole bunch of veteran cultural activists attended the Community Arts Network National Gathering in May of that year in Asheville, North Carolina. And that is described on a report that you can sometimes see a copy of here and there. That slide is going to come up, I think. Coming out of that meeting, I joined up with Dee Davis and Dudley Koch, who then both worked at Apple Shop in Whitesburg, Kentucky. We decided to test the waters to see if we could get people interested in cultural policy questions again. And that was really the next time that I showed up as an advocate for a new WPA. Let me read you just a little bit of a petition we wrote in May 2004 called Artist Call for Cultural Policy. You can see it's still preserved on the Roadside Theater website, which is a good resource for a lot of this cultural activist material from, we're going too far. We want slide, no, you're all the way at the end now. We're back to slide 19. I'll read you a bit of the petition while we're figuring this out. This text is on slide 20, exactly right. Create public service employment for community cultural development. Cuts in state and municipal spending for cities, schools, parks, libraries, and arts organizations weaken social cohesion, endangering future generations rather than inviting them into cultural participation as a right of citizenship. Our nation needs a new federal initiative to underwrite public service jobs in cultural development, staffing local not-for-profit cultural institutions with citizens who are eager to be of community service. Funding should begin at $300 million per annum through the Department of Labor and/or other appropriate agencies to return public service employment to the current day equivalent of its pre-1980 level of $200 million federal dollars. I quoted the call and wrote about the WPA and CETA in my book, New Creative Community, The Art of Cultural Development, which was published in 2006. And that's the next slide. A few years later, Barack Obama was elected president, promising the nation recovery from what was called the Great Recession of 2008, that had been triggered in the US by the collapse of the housing bubble, fueled by speculation in exotic derivatives and the subprime mortgage meltdown. This should have been a major turning point in the history of neoliberalism, discrediting the notion of unending growth. But instead, you who are around know what happened. Too big to fail mostly prevailed, with huge bank bailouts and not much help for the rest of us. Before that became clear, though, many of us hoped that the new administration would invest in what we were calling cultural recovery. And you can see Jeff Chang's second row a little bit to the right. You can see me laughing hilariously with a red jacket a row or two up. And Caron, I know you're in this picture too. She's all the way on the right-hand corner. Four of us heard that there was someone working in the White House organizing meetings of activists. So Caron, the late Claudine Brown, Billy Wimsatt, who's a mastermind between today's wonderful Movement Voter Project, and we prevailed on Yossi Sargent, who was working with the White House's Summer of Service initiative, promoting things like AmeriCorps, to invite a delegation of artists and activists to the White House. Well, I think you're seeing a theme develop here because we didn't get anything at the White House, but we did go to Busboys and Poets afterwards, and we divided into groups to talk about the issues we wanted to follow up on. And Jeff Chang and I, who you're going to meet in a little while, convened one on cultural policy. And two things came out of that. First, another petition with a founding group of 36 people who had been at the White House meeting. We put out 6 points. I'll read you the one that called for a new WPA. Put artists to work to support cultural recovery. We need a new WPA, a public service jobs program addressing all our national goals: clean energy, excellent education, sound economy, good health, and more. It should include putting artists and creative organizers to work for the common good, using every art form and way of working, providing well-rounded education, sustaining and caring for the ill, engaging elders in creativity, rebuilding community infrastructure to reflect our best. 75 years ago, the WPA supported 5 arts programs as part of FDR's program to recover from the Great Depression. It worked. Today, jobs are still the engine of prosperity when tied to public service. No investment brings greater impact. And I think we have the signatures coming up next. You can see for yourself in alpha order that Caron and Jeff signed, along a lot of other people who, if you can see this, you may recognize their names. So from the petition, a project idea evolved. Here's how we described it at the time. Cultural recovery is a project to build and sustain a coalition of artists, cultural organizations, and their allies in other realms of social action, education, and organizing. They would join to promote the democratic interest in culture, including democratic cultural policies and substantial public investment in community development, education, and community service through the arts. Its centerpiece would be culturalrecovery.net. I think I still own that domain. An online center for information and organizing. While it would be home to a full range of initiatives to bring attention and resources to culture's mobilizing power, its first targeted initiative would be a campaign to create a substantial, sustained public sector investment in community service programs employing artists and cultural organizations as part of national recovery. WPA 2, or I think today I'd say WPA 2.0. The paper's appendix included several different approaches to structuring a new WPA, but since the Obama administration refused to try for anything like public service jobs, so long as Republicans in Congress opposed that, it was just another good idea that disappeared for lack of political courage. We hope that getting these ideas into the national conversation could have long-lasting impact. I gave a ton of talks about a new WPA at that time. For instance, a new WPA, why a sustainable future demands cultural recovery. That was for the Cultural Policy Center at the University of Chicago in October of 2009. And I was by no means the only one talking about it. Peter Coyote, Bill Irwin, and I, we each made these little videos that you can still see on my YouTube channel with our personal pleas for cultural recovery. In 2012, I met Adam Horowitz, who had the idea there should be something called the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture. And if you saw the last program before this one, you see Denise right there in the front of that picture. One of his ideas was that there should be a culture corps, which I interpreted as a new WPA. So I signed on as chief policy wonk and worked with the USDAC until 2019, instigating its national cabinet, authoring its policy documents like this one, and writing a great many guides, co-producing lots of programs to promote culture in the public interest and the public interest in culture. In 2016, the USDAC issued Standing for Cultural Democracy, as you see here. One of its 10 points was institute a new public service jobs program, putting artists and others to work, strengthening physical and cultural infrastructure. So here we are in 2020. Again, I've been trying to drum up productive conversation about the fact that the economy actually needs even more stimulus than it did in 2009. Infrastructure is in even worse shape. Countless people are out of work and out of prospects. And artists, as one of my colleagues used to say back in the day, are shovel ready. This summer, I teamed up with my friend Michael Schwartz, a longtime cultural organizer and public artist. It was right after the draft Democratic Party platform was released. And we contacted platform committee members and asked them to include language that we drafted calling for a new WPA. We hope they'd be interested, especially since the first draft of the platform mentioned neither art, nor artists, nor public service employment. But we heard from one of the platform committee members that they tried to include public service jobs, but they couldn't get the votes. When the final platform came out, there was a boilerplate paragraph pledging allegiance to the National Endowment for the Arts and the other federal cultural agencies, but nothing more. I asked IA to share with you the latest thing I've done on this, and that was in that e-blast that went out about this program. It was called The Arts and the State in Times of Crisis, the Prospect of a New WPA. A dialogue between myself and Francois Matarasso, a colleague who's based in the UK and France, exploring lots of different forms of state support for arts work since the 1930s in both the UK and the US. And in that same email, there was a link to an international Zoom conversation that we had about it that was pretty interesting. So now I'm turning to you, looking toward the future instead of the past. I want to make a few points before Caron and Jeff join us. First, my primary work has been focused on cultural democracy, a social order in which every culture is recognized for its contributions. Everyone is invited and acknowledged as a culture maker and culture bearer. And everyone feels equally welcome to create, communicate, participate. Another way to look at this is full and universal cultural citizenship, not the kind that demands papers and passports, but the kind that understands cultural rights as fundamental, essential, inalienable human rights. Much of the most powerful work that embodies those aims comes under the heading of community-based arts, which is also known as community arts, arts for social change, arts-based community development, community cultural development. We never really settled on a name, but you know what I'm talking about. In this work, artists place their gifts at the service of the self-determination and liberation of a community that may be defined by geography, affinity, identity, purpose. They work in community centers, after-school programs, correctional institutions, hospitals, senior centers, activist groups, anywhere really, to co-create music, writing, visual arts, dance, theater, media that expresses participants' concerns or aspirations, conveys their history, celebrates their community's accomplishments, whatever expresses people's own words in their own voices, to paraphrase Freire. That kind of work, it has to be experienced to be comprehended. People, including myself, have written about a zillion words about it, but words cannot convey what can be understood in an hour with a group of people discovering themselves and placing their own experience in the context of a collective story, making something beautiful and meaningful out of their own alienation or belonging, love or fear. Putting artists to work in public service across the country, especially in places that are otherwise lacking the wherewithal to support the work, would be a huge quantum leap for the field. Second, community-based artists would be critical to the success of a new WPA because their skills are perfectly suited to the project of recovery. Pick any of the essential aspects of recovery that stretch before us, God willing, before too long. I mentioned one possibility is creating a just transition to clean energy, which seems to me a centerpiece of any new WPA. The conversation about that is often in very physical, concrete terms. Let's support jobs in solar or wind energy to transition people who are in fossil fuel-driven jobs. But no matter which aspect of the public good you want to address, the work of artists is pivotal because to change the world, we have to change the story we hold. Addressing climate crisis has to seem doable, and people need to see meaningful roles for themselves in it. Community-based artists who have skills in organizing and collaboration that are just as powerful as their artistic abilities, they know how to engage people in speaking their truths and how to braid those truths into new stories that open others' hearts and minds. Recovering from a time when people are afraid to leave their homes, reweaving social fabric, their work is essential. Third, public service employment has been an absolute no-no in Congress since CETA in the 70s because Republicans so successfully promoted their critique and the Democrats so obligingly caved. The right said that jobs should be a marketplace-only responsibility. They said previous job programs had given a platform to people with un-American ideas, that public service jobs breed welfare cheaters and lazy bones who'd rather be paid not to work. And if this is echoing in your ear, it's because we just heard all these same arguments deployed by the right against extending unemployment insurance supplements during the pandemic. The counter arguments to all this are just totally self-evident. Unemployment is at levels unequaled since the Great Depression. Many thousands of people are unemployed or underemployed and need help. Under current conditions, many people want to do something they find meaningful. They want to contribute to the public good, especially after a time where they've sacrificed a lot. The needs are huge. Strengthening physical infrastructure, supporting that just energy transition, repairing our badly damaged social fabric. The exact shape and scope of a new program would have to fit the times. I've laid out a bunch of models. I'm not the only one. But whatever the specifics are, it would have to triumph over those tired arguments that have been successful in Congress since the 70s. So the way I see it, only two things are needed to make a new WPA real. Elected officials with enough spine to oppose the right's silly arguments and cross-sector engagement and mobilization. So why do I say cross-sector? Because special pleading for artists has never, ever succeeded. Every program that has employed artists in the past has been universal, intended to support many types of unemployed or underemployed workers. We have to pay attention to what has been true, because that would help us correct an idea that has really been holding us back, that artists are more special and worthy than other types of workers. And that is a really, really hard argument on which to build a partnership. I cannot understand for the life of me why mainstream arts advocates haven't grasped this. They keep asking taxpayers to underwrite artist specialness. Support us, we're great. Here's a bunch of questionable economic data and secondary arguments to prove it. The result? The real value of the NEA budget today is significantly less than half of what it was in 1980 when Reagan took office. I would like to see advocates form alliances with others who want to put people to work for social good and together create another universal program like the WPA or CETA. It would be an antidote to the snobbery encoded in mainstream arts advocacy, which very often makes people feel that they are deficient unless they adopt the tastes of the elite. My colleague, Francois Matarasso, has pointed out that there may be one exception to the universal approach, and I think it's germane to you guys, so I want to mention it to you. He refers to the A-levels exam scandal in the UK. When British students couldn't gather in big groups to take these national exams, the government decided to give them scores based on things like how their schools had done in the past or what their teachers thought their likely scores were. And that really disadvantaged a ton of students from low-income schools who were downgraded from the performance of which they were really capable. Francois says, quote, "It led to a politically resonant moment in the UK during this pandemic. It touches millions of people. There is a sense that we are at a risk of failing a generation if we don't help an entire generation get into the world, both through the exams and then getting them into work. That is a platform on which you can genuinely build a coalition of people who would care about that and say, we need a young people's employment initiative, and you can tie it to environmental work, artwork, a whole set of stuff that's worth doing. And there are real jobs like that. Give young people a chance to do some good in the community." So many of you teach, I know. You've been tasked with bringing classes online. You've been dealing with parents and students who feel cheated by what's happened to higher education. This idea may be especially resonant. This could be the nugget of a campaign that could work. How best could young people and their families be brought on board with a jobs program that employs them for the public good, giving them a route to the world of work? Fifth, I hope this 50-year stroll along one path of cultural organizing makes the point that socially engaged artists as a group have been ever ready to take part in something that links the little stories of our lives and livelihoods to the big story of the economy, culture, and the body politic. Nowadays, much cultural organizing focuses on racial justice, gender justice, climate justice, the wicked problems that have seized national attention at last. But I fear that too many people are thinking small, accepting the cultural funding pie as it is, for instance, and arguing that it should be sliced differently. It's not that that's not true. It's absolutely true. But I would like us to be thinking much bigger. The US is spending more than 4 annual National Endowment for the Arts budgets a day, 7 days a week on war. Our expenditure on policing, prisons, and the system that supports them beggars imagination. I often ask 3 questions. Who are we as a people? What do we stand for? How do we want to be remembered? Deducing US cultural policy from the way we spent our Commonwealth is sadly easy. We evidently want to be remembered as the planet's biggest punishers. It's time for cultural advocates to stop focusing on reslicing the tiny arts funding pie, both public and private, and shift to the whole bakery, where the real magnitude of the problem comes into focus, and a new WPA or a basic income grant becomes truly conceivable. Finally, it wasn't until I took this journey that I realized my presentation might be titled by someone a little more easily discouraged than myself, nearly 50 years in pursuit of a lost cause. I have to admit I'm stubborn, but I chalk my persistence up to incredulity. I just haven't been able to bring myself to believe that after the terrible mess neoliberalism and Trump have made of our Commonwealth, Biden or any other candidate would be cowed by the tired arguments against public service employment that have held sway since Reagan. The truth is, I'd be just as happy with a basic income grant. That was another one of the 10 points in the USDAC's 2016 platform. If we don't get a new WPA now, perhaps I'll turn my attention to that for the next 50 years. But in the meantime, let's talk about how we might put people to work for cultural recovery now with Caron Atlas and Jeff Chang.
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Imagining America, for inviting me, and Arlene for inviting me to celebrate the spirit of Randy Martin, who I had the good fortune of working with. Arlene, I'm so impressed with your presentation, and it really demonstrates that this is long haul work, and I'm so moved by how your relentless vision for it. I had a chance to read this in advance, so I wrote down some comments, which I'm going to read, and then I really look forward to our discussion together. I got to know you, Arlene, in the 1980s through the Alliance for Cultural Democracy. This alliance was so important in connecting community-based work from across the country to amplify its advocacy voice. I was working then at Apple Shop in the Appalachian coalfields, founded as a program of the War on Poverty in 1969. I could see firsthand from that work how a jobs program could seed a flourishing cultural center, which now 50 years later continues to have a profound impact on both the local and regional economy and social justice organizing. I learned from that work how our community-rooted programs could impact policy on state, regional, and national levels through strategic alliances. And even though the War on Poverty shifted from a bottom-up program to a top-down effort, maintaining status quo power, once organizations like Apple Shop got started, they cultivated their own transformational power. I worked with you, Arlene, on many of the programs you mentioned, including the White House convening. I co-organized that convening wearing two hats, Arts and Democracy, a program of state voices, a national civic participation network, and Pratt Center for Community Development. I say this to reinforce your point about this work needing to be cross-sector, with our cross-sector relationships being systemic, sustained, and reciprocal. They can't just be transactional or episodic when we need something from each other. Critical to the convening at the White House was that it included allies beyond the arts, including Service Employees International Union, League of Young Voters, Voto Latino, Center for Rural Strategies, and many other organizing groups, relationships which developed in the years to come. I got to know you, Jeff, as part of my work organizing with State Voice's predecessor, National Voice, a national organizing effort that brought together nonprofit organizations to engage historically disenfranchised communities leading up to the 2004 election. We met through hip hop organizing. 4 years later, Jeff wrote, during a deepening economic crisis, that creativity can be a powerful form of organizing community from the bottom up. The economic crisis gives us a chance to rethink the role of creativity in making a vibrant economy and civil society. This inspired a convening at the Pratt Center, which we framed as follows. And I bring this up because it's relevant as we think about how to imagine a WPA today. In a time of crisis, there's a tendency to focus inward and circle the wagons to survive. Here we want to do the opposite, to expand and reframe the conversation about economic stimulus and national service so that arts, culture, and media are part of a greater vision for equitable, democratic, and culturally vital communities. Our frame is not the survival of the sector, but rather the role of cultural vitality in the survival and revitalization of our communities. These days, my cross-sector collaborations happen mostly on the city level in New York, where my two organizations, Arts and Democracy and Naturally Occurring Cultural Districts New York, are collaborating with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, Department of Transportation, Participatory Budgeting through the City Council, and the Civic Engagement Commission. We also were a partner for our city's cultural plan. I draw on this experience as I think about how we might be part of building a new WPA. Our work needs to be bottom up and top down. We need to be part of organizing coalitions that push elected officials and government agencies to do what's right and be with the coalitions, not just for our own goals, but for shared goals for our communities. We are doing that now for participatory budgeting, which we fought for over many years and now is in danger of disappearing. What are the cross-sector coalitions fighting for equitable jobs programs that we should be part of? This work needs to be relationship-based, with relationships that are both courageous and sustained, where we can speak truth to power and continue to work together. One of the last times I was with Randy Martin, he was insisting to a city council member that the cultural plan be centered on equity, speaking truth to power. It's important to cultivate bridge people who live in multiple worlds. An example is Elizabeth Hamby, an artist who directs the Take Care New York initiative at the Department of Health, who brought us into the agency. Who are the bridge people who are at the table discussing jobs programs and public service? Culture is essential. We know how it's been a lifeline during the pandemic, but we can't make this case alone. Our partnership with the Department of Health is continuing during the pandemic and supporting critical jobs for youth. This isn't because we have fully made the case for arts and culture, but because they are interwoven in powerful violence interruption and public health programs that are recognized as essential. We need to root our work in the knowledge and experience of our communities and create decentralized models, as well as work with government. One of the interesting lessons of this CETA program in New York is how it worked through diverse cultural and community organizations to reach cultural workers who were often underserved by other programs. And we need to put forward bold proposals that imagine the world differently and be knowledgeable about how to implement these proposals. This includes understanding how they play out at different levels of government, mapping who has power to make decisions and who has access to the decision makers, and identifying the alliances where we can build our own power. I remember how after President Obama won, we spoke of how we needed to move from reaction to proposition. And in many ways, we weren't ready for that moment. This time we need to be ready to identify propositions that are deeply rooted in racial justice and equity and that promote not recovery, but transformation. In New York, we're about to have a massive turnover of city leadership. I'm inspired by women of color like Shahana Hanif and theater artist Mino Lara, who are running for office, animated by community mutual aid, grassroots organizing, and mobilizations for racial justice. I think leaders like these across the country will be powerful allies as we take the leap to imagine and enact a new WPA. Thanks.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Caron. And thank you so much to Arlene for the kind invitation to have both of us here today. I did get to meet both of you, I believe in the mid-aughts. And this is when I could still call myself a youth and nobody would question me. And my memory's faded, since then, because I'm not so much a youth anymore. But so many things I have learned directly from the two of you. And so I'm really humbled to be able to be here as part of this discussion tonight. I grew up, I guess, as part of a generation, a hip hop generation. And hip hop really taught us that culture moves before politics. And so when we began to sort of age, get more mature, and think a lot more about what it is that our role was meant to be, and began to really engage intergenerationally, was during that particular period in the mid-aughts. And the kinds of visions that really appealed, I think, to me were visions that were a mix of this really hard-won pragmatism, which is, I think, what Arlene, your work has always reflected to me, this really hard-won, and this relentlessness, absolutely, this relentlessness about pursuing this ideal. And so that idealism and pragmatism together is something that I think attracted me to the both of you. And I remember spending a lot of time just learning at Arlene's feet, just reading her books, coming to understand what she meant by community arts and creative community, and trying to think about how that could apply that to the things that I had learned, because we had come up after the devastation of the NEA. We had come up after a period in which there was, you could not count on or expect, but you could actually talk about government funding the arts and not necessarily be laughed at. And I remember at that particular point what a revelation it was for us to be able to think about public policy, about cultural policy. And so I felt like I apprenticed myself to both of you and learned so much at your feet. And I think the real radical idea here in the WPA that's kind of survived for me, certainly, is beyond the sort of idea of jobs, recovery and relief, employment, which is, I get, part of the pragmatic case that we have to be able to make in arguing for cultural policy. But it was this other part of it, this articulation of the role of artists in making that recovery and actually bringing about transformational change. And this sort of idea that actually artists play this homeostatic kind of a role, that during periods of great difficulty, artists are really the ones that are creating the structures that are shoring up communities, and that for that reason, they needed to be centered in any kind of a process of thinking about recovery. And of course, they do this and they continue to do this. And what we've thought about, of course, a lot in our communities is thinking about racial justice and cultural justice. And certainly this summer, the events of this summer have pushed it back to the center of the stage, right? The ongoing violence, anti-Black violence committed at a state and a vigilante type of level, and just the intensity of that, right, has brought millions of people into the streets and forced a reckoning, frankly, in the arts sector and the culture sector. And it's also highlighted, once again, the crucial role that artists and culture bearers play in being able to shore up communities and to build structures of resilience, but also of vision, right, of progress, of idealism, of moving us towards the kind of multiracial democratic society that we all really want to be able to live in. And so there's this, again, profound and largely unarticulated kind of focus that you all have been bringing to, and Arlene, you've been bringing relentlessly back into discussions about what it means to have a recovery, right? Which is the central role of artists and culture bearers. And so that was part of that became part of the discussions that many of us began to have this past summer and into the fall that resulted in the Cultural New Deal. We created this blueprint, this sort of document that we call the Cultural New Deal, and it's at culturalnewdeal.com, that we offered up, which was meant to be able to highlight this special role of artists, to be able to center, again, the role of artists in making society. So not artists as being instrumentalized for their labor, but artists as being crucial to the kind of vision and the making of the society that we want to be able to live in. that artists and culture bearers are crucial to the health and well-being of our communities, thinking about that particularly in these times of pandemic, that culture bearers and artists are central to thinking about resilience in this time when we're dealing with this environmental crisis, and that it's not just about making a special pleading for artists, right? That it's not just about, well, artists deserve a job, artists deserve a handout. They absolutely do. But why? Because their work will help all of us to be able to move forward. And so, I think, for instance, about Rebecca Solnit's, the great writer Rebecca Solnit's book, A Paradise Made in Hell, where she talks about communities that form after disaster. And of course, it's in the eyes of folks who would want to instrumentalize artists or see artists only in terms of art as a commodity, which is, again, the era that my generation grew up into, right? When government funding has been taken off the table and the marketplace and the nonprofit industrial complex are thought of as the places to go for non-commodifiable art, right? But to get out of this sort of idea of artists as just offering entertainment or diversion, because one of the things that Rebecca points out is that in these communities of disaster, what appears immediately? Art, right? Cultural creation, right? People bringing forward their cultural practices to be able to heal people in these moments of chaos, in these moments of collapse, and that makes perfect sense. That's exactly what we do. So moving again beyond artists as objects of policy to an idea of objects of artists as subjects, right? Not objects of policy, but as subjects of social, cultural transformation. That's what I think is so profound about this particular ideal of fighting for a cultural New Deal, a new WPA. It's not just about the recovery, it's about the entire process of remaking this country and the world.
So true. Thank you so much, Jeff and Caron. You're so smart and so big-hearted, and that's my favorite combination. So thank you for showing up with all that you are. As you're both talking, I'm thinking one of the things that we're up against is kind of a cognitive dissonance between people's actual experience and the story, the collective story, the sort of dominant story that is told about it. So, for example, Jeff's saying what shows up, all the George Floyd murals would be a good example of that, but also what shows up in our individual lives. I want to console myself. I find the music, the music that opens my heart, and I lie down somewhere and let that fill me, and millions of people are doing that at the same time. So we know through lived experience that this is the truth, that, to quote myself, artists are the stem cells of the body politic. There's so many different roles that we can deploy ourselves in to bring healing and possibility to a situation that sometimes feels hopeless. And then there's a big story that's in contradiction to that, which is artists are these little babies who get played for who make a living having fun, and who have unearned privilege, and they're celebrities, and they don't really have anything to do with our normal lives. They're like the exception to normal life. How do we bridge those stories? I think it's something we've all been working on for a long time. But something that seems to me to be right in the middle of the bridge is the notion of the public good, which isn't much in our conversation, our national conversation these days. And I think that's what I would say, that we're talking about different ways that artists have gifts that can be deployed for social good, for public good. And one of the things we need to do is raise the value of public good and social good again in people's eyes after 50 years of Wall Street, the US Chamber of Commerce, all the business interests that have actively been promoting the idea that government is no good and the public sector, we can expect nothing from them. How do we rehabilitate that sense of commonwealth, of public good? It's in my mind a lot these days.
Mhm.
It's interesting to me too. And Jeff, I was going to quote from Rebecca Solnit as well, who you introduced me to. Because after Sandy here, and I'm certainly, it's played out in so many places, there are these moments when people come together and really do believe in the public good and throw themselves into it. And there are opportunities in our case, in our work after Sandy, when we were able to work with government. We were able to do the creative work on the ground with artists, but also collaborate with government in ways we've never been able to do before, because they suspended, the disaster allowed them to suspend their bureaucracy and their restrictions and their conventional ways of working. And we had these discussions afterwards when we tried to codify some of the creative things that happened after the disaster. And the city then said, oh, well, we could only do that because there was a disaster. We can't then codify that into our ongoing policy. But I think we're in that moment again now, when we can break the rules. We can push ourselves all to break the rules together in support of the public good, and imagine what that might look like. And hopefully this time we can codify it, because that's part of what's intriguing to me about creating this new WPA or whatever it is how do we take this work that happens all the time on a community level and bring it to scale so that it can have a bigger impact.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a really weird kind of thing that we can do here, which is there's sort of almost a little bit of a rhetorical jiu-jitsu that we could play here, because I can't think actually of a better example of the role that artists and culture bearers have played, like say in the last decade, than in the sort of way that this new Black cultural renaissance has shaped people's views, and really created the seedbed out of which these social movements have been, the Black Lives Matter movement has been able to spring, to think about the relationship between Black filmmakers, Black musicians, right, Black visual artists, and their publics, and that's laid the groundwork for literally the possibility of a new consensus around the need for racial justice and cultural justice that we haven't had in over half a century. So that ironically, these industry funded types of ways in which Black artists have been able to figure out how to make their way and build these ecosystems can actually make us, can actually give us a way to be able to imagine what it would really look like if the ecosystems that we know all of these artists came from at the community level were actually really adequately funded, that we didn't have to go out and beg foundations for this dollar or for that dollar, or rely upon the goodwill of super generous, very wealthy donors to be able to kind of reach scale. And I think that that's part of the weird kind of, thing that is coming up in this particular moment, right? Is being able to kind of look at the ways these openings, no, not openings, I should say, the way that artists have actually innovated through these restrictions, which they're always going to do, have been able to create ways in which we can actually see these new imaginings. What would happen if the hip hop shop down the block that is allowing kids to be able to find their voices really actually had real funding? What kinds of possibilities could we see then?
Mm-hmm. And it's so, I mean, I completely agree with you, Jeff. And it's so important for us to understand that there's a continuum here, because no matter how insurgent, effective, et cetera, a particular work of art is, a piece of music, a film, or whatever, the fact is, to have that soil that nourishes a culture and from which the whole array of cultural policies grow, you have to recognize that not everything can turn a buck. And especially what can't turn a buck is stuff for kids, creating the moment in which kids are able to see themselves and their own lives in every day, not as a special program where you're bused to like a museum, once a semester or something like that. And so what I would love to see, in addition to all the advocacy that could come from the grassroots for something like a new WPA, however that would be configured now, or for the program of the Cultural New Deal, I would love to see some of these people who are making a lot of money because they are producing cultural products or cultural processes that can turn a buck, and they've been doing so successfully, speak for the public good dimension of this, Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah. What I'd say I really love about this particular moment, about your work, about the work of the USDAC, about the work of people like Dudley and Marta Vega and the Creative Justice Institute in this particular moment, is that folks are being able to make the connections of figuring out how we actually pool our ecosystems together, right? The work of the Intercultural Leadership Institute, the work, you've got folks who are already like the School of Arts and Culture in San Jose, who are already like administering their own WPA-like types of programs, with the understanding that absolutely it's about, again, not just the jobs piece and making sure that artists are able to sustain themselves, but that this is the key to actually maintaining and building these structures of resilience that they've already established in times of good. Intercultural Leadership Institute as well, in terms of the grant programs that they're offering in this particular moment. And that actually the nonprofit industrial complex is trying to catch up with these innovations that are happening at the local, regional, even national type of levels that are happening in marginalized communities who understand already the core purpose of what it means to be maintaining culture and advocating for the arts in this moment.
And because we're in this context, in this little black square that we're all in right now, let me just shout out to academia too, because I do speak a lot on campuses, and I hear a lot from people who are in academic settings, and I have yet to go to an art school in which WPA and CETA are taught as important art movements. And I have yet to go to an art school in which people, there's something called social practice, but community-based arts is not absolutely synonymous with social practice. And I have yet to go to an art school where community-based arts is described as a legitimate way to be an artist in the world, and that's a focal program. There have been some, they come, they gone, they come, they gone, but right now, there's basically none. I think,
I
I
guess I just want to underline the point too about the Intercultural Institute, and just, I was trying to get to that when I was talking about decentralized models. I think that we have national impact by building from the ground up, and that institute is powerful because it's rooted in the particular cultures of its partners. And then there's the power of connecting those cultures, and it's a network model. And I think that really is what we need to be driving from, network models that are rooted in community, and seeing that as opposed to some kind of national model that's then imposed on our diverse communities.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Hi, I'm going to come back because we do have a couple of questions that I think will keep us going with the panel. And the first one is from our good friend and my predecessor, Lisa Lee. Structurally, what could be gained if we integrated arts and culture across governmental departments, like on transportation? So it'd be funded in infrastructural bills public health or safety or housing, all of those different governmental structures? Or should we push for a standalone endowment for the arts? So maybe I'll leave that question. She has a second part, but throw that out onto the table.
I agree with Lisa. It should be integrated. It's fine to have dedicated programs for artists, but that shouldn't be the thing that we hitch our wagon to. It should be total integration from my perspective. See what my colleagues think.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Karen, please.
I'll just go real quick. I think it should be integrated and separate. And I think that the trick is, and I just keep getting reminded this when I hear Jeff speak about culture preceding politics, and that there's different culture of working in a government agency. I know this from working a lot with the Department of Health here, where the cultural energy has to fit itself within the energy of the city agency. And so I love the idea of it being integrated, but really integrated in a way that it keeps its dynamic nature. And I do think that one thing that Elizabeth Hamby, who works at the Department of Health, who's an artist, talks about is naturally occurring artists in residence. So not just doing artists in residence as special projects, but having people who are ongoing staff in the agencies be artists and bring that sensibility to the work.
Mm-hmm. I'm so appreciative actually too for you mentioning naturally occurring cultural districts, because I think it's a perfect example of the ways in which government can actually have all of these different types of links to artists. I work at Race Forward, and the largest we have the largest local government network in the country focused on racial equity, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And there's a number of folks throughout the country who have been thinking a lot about this type of a question: how to actually integrate, how to actually create calls from a Department of Transportation or a Department of Health or that kind of thing for artists to be able to come in. We've got, our friends like Roberto Bedoya here in Oakland who have already been integrating these types of programs into the programs that government is doing, so that the poet laureate Michelle Lee is literally working on all of these different types of policy spaces. And what artists, of course, bring, as we all know, is a completely different process and perspective to the types of problems that folks are looking at. And so it feels like it needs to definitely be something that we continue to pursue. For the most part, what we've seen is government instrumentalizing the arts for tourist type of monies, right? And certainly now that we're heading out of like boom times and the sort of creative class times, now that it finally seems as if that particular period is really over, the boom models are not working, right? And so we've really got to think about the ways in which arts and culture actually figure into these resilience types of measures and ideals.
Lisa also asks about the fit or the disjuncture really between this idea of sort of art as labor, but how it is compatible or not compatible with capitalism. And I want to just wrap a little bit of what I think Caron said, that how do we really braid this work into those sort of ongoing features of society? Because when we end up in a rough financial period, as Jeff points out, not only in government agencies, but in universities or schools, these are the programs that get cut first. They are looked at as frills. How do we bring the arts into the center of the public square and the center of, as Arlene said, the sort of a notion of public good?
Well, I appreciate Lisa bringing up capitalism, because at least I don't find myself talking about it as much as I think about it. And one thing that's true is that in a capitalist society, especially what we optimistically call late capitalism, the value of things is judged by how much income they can generate or other things that can be weighed and measured. And the artistic experience is antithetical to that. It can't be valued by the criteria of the dominant society. So this is what my last book, The Culture of Possibility, is about. How to understand that old system of value, I don't even know why it's still walking around right now, because it's dead on its feet, but we'll see, if they can animate it for a little while longer, how that old system of value can be understood as not serving us as a society to the degree that we begin to find other ways to value social goods. And then we don't have this problem. It's no longer a dilemma. So yeah, we really need to think about the damage that's done by the commercialization of absolutely everything in our society, including public goods, and the need to undo that in order to implement some of the big ideas and visions that have been expressed here today.
I also had a question about, I guess mostly in June, as in many city streets, there were the large block paintings of Black Lives Matter. And at the beginning, it seemed like it was really, a sort of huge, cameraable, broadcastable statement of the protest. And then gradually, over time, it felt like it was the city giving over those streets was a substitute for actually doing anything material to actually address the social problem. And so, separate from capital, how do we keep the state from essentially using art to paint over the problems that they're not ready to address, I guess is the question.
If you, I'll pontificate all day if you guys aren't ready to answer this. Let me just say, we tend to look at this as kind of an either or situation, but the fact is, taking away the permission to do the murals on the plywood and the walls and stuff doesn't then make the society more accountable for the real change that people are asking. So I think the first thing we do, and sure, it's been done over and over again now, is to say, this is important, but it's not a substitute for the substantive change that people are asking, and just keep holding their feet to the fire. But we certainly don't want to do anything that even inadvertently discourages people from bringing cultural expression, to those moments.
And I'm still thinking about one of your earlier questions that maybe ties into this, which is just, we have to be organized in our communities, and not by ourselves, but with others who are fighting for the things we're fighting for. And these are long-term struggles. I mean, we're part of a coalition here in Brooklyn that we've been part of fighting around gentrification issues, and now there are environmental justice issues. And it's just ongoing organizing and being there as artists and cultural workers, because we're part of that conversation too, not to be instrumentalized, but to be members of the community who care about these issues. And so to me, it's this long-term work. And so when I see these kind of performative efforts by cities, to say we care about this issue for a week or two, and then it goes away. I mean, it's just like, no, we have to, that's not going to solve it. It's got to be ongoing organizing.
I think we have time for one more question. If we can get one quickish answer from Tim Eatman. Would love to hear more about what the panelists think are some of the implications of a new WPA for the way that we conduct higher education, publicly engaged scholarship, and teaching, I think, importantly, teaching.
Higher education is such a hard road to hoe right now, right? I mean, it's amazing. It's like I have a consulting relationship with an art school, and I mean, there's always a question of what you need an MFA for, but let me tell you, the question of what you need an MFA for has a new resonance right now. That's not going to go away. So, I feel like Tim's question, the sort of underlying truth that has to be faced in it is, what is higher ed going to be like? And what's it going to be for post this period? And I would say that's a huge, the idea of a new WPA is a huge opportunity for higher ed, because it really foregrounds the question of what is this learning for? And as I spend time in art schools, I don't often see that question engaged.
Yeah, just to maybe build on that too, I'm still thinking too, Cal, about your last question, because what your last question raised for me and why I had a big hesitation was it raises actually all these issues of our artist ethics, right? As well as community ethics. Like, will the artists, and this is something that's, I think, been central to those of us who grew up in this generation, like, what is the role of an artist in terms of their engagement? Who are they accountable to? Who are they making themselves accountable to? And what do they actually hope to gain out of the project down the line, right? And what is that production, or what is that artwork like? How does that end up living in the world? And then, of course, we are gonna be critical of the politicians, as we always will be, but it raises a lot of those artistic types of ethics. And I think what Arlene's raising here too is a set of ethical questions, right? They're direct. I think you're framing them, Arlene, in terms of you're framing them in terms of what are the directions that leaders and faculty can kind of push in these institutions in this particular type of moment, right? But it does raise again too, like, what are the ethics of these degrees at this particular point, right? What are folks actually hoping to get out of MFAs in this particular moment, if it's not to get a job in what's going to be a completely transformed, possibly decaying, or reformed, or remade, revolutionized, whatever word you want to use, arts and culture sector. I think that that's something that is absolutely going to become a major issue. And part of the answer is, yeah, it's absolutely the right time for a reckoning around that, to think about what does it mean to have a curriculum that might talk about American art, but never mention the structures that were able to create American art in the 20th century, right? The ecosystems that all of these famous American artists came through. So just some thoughts.
And
I really appreciate all of your insights. I wish, we could go on and talk about this. I mean, I know I have a dozen more questions, but we also are called here to announce the 2020 winner. And I do want to, though, really invite everyone in the solitary space of their Zoom space to really give applause and love to Arlene, for sure, and to really fantastic interlocutors, Caron Atlas and Jeff Chang. So I really want to
Thank you a million.
So we'll have Wood come back, and there you are. Okay. Very excited to announce this year's awardee, who will, of course, like Arlene, be making a presentation at next year's fall gathering. And it really, this is a person who I think everybody who's been involved in Imagining America all the way along really both respects and loves as a great culture bearer, not only of her own environment, but of IA itself. And so I'm gonna let Wood, though, as the chair, actually bring this person into being and onto camera. And so I'll turn it over to Wood.
Thank you again, Cal. It's not often that you get to like introduce your mentor. So I'll just start by saying, as I always do, that I exist and find agency in this work due to the tutelage of phenomenal women of color. And our Randy Martin Spirit Award recipient is one such woman. So Carol Frances B. Bell, AKA Akua Wambui, is a native New Orleanian who for over 20 years served in the public sector as an administrator and planner of education, social, cultural, and health programs before she realized that her home was in the realm of culture and art. In 1998, she and the late great Douglas Redd co-founded the Ashe Cultural Arts Center in Central City, New Orleans, which became a pivotal force of revitalization and transformation of the Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard corridor into a multicultural sector that's full of nonprofit and civic organizations that service the community in immeasurable ways, under the mantle of culture, community, and commerce as foundational pillars of human development. So she is known affectionately as Miss B and referred to as Mama Carol. But not only in the community, but around the world, Mama, a distinction that denotes not only the esteem and exalted nature of motherhood, but also in the African tradition, we use a distinction of Mama as an honoring that denotes her place as a political and cultural figure. So Mama Carol is a published poet and writer. Her book of original poetry and a manner of speaking. And also she's represented in numerous anthologies, including From a Bend in the River that was edited by Baba Kalamu Yasalam. She has several published interviews, testimonies, and articles, including a chapter in the publication, Civic Engagement in the Wake of Katrina, and her most recent publishing, which was in Didn't Wash Us Away, Transformative Stories of Post-Katrina Cultural Resilience. She serves on countless boards in the community and around the country, and is a frequent and sought after keynote speaker, panelist. She's the recipient of too many awards to mention right here, but has been recognized and commended locally, nationally, internationally. I think that she prizes her role as a cultural warrior and racial healer to be her most distinguished award. I have had the extreme pleasure to sit at her feet, to call her mama, mentor, and placed under my foundation 3 of her ideals that I'll mention here. One is the weaving of the wheat, that we can only advance together. We cannot do it alone, and we cannot do it without each other. Another is the concept of radical hopefulness, to be hopeful with a veracity, right? And lastly, the charge that she leaves for us at Ashe, and I'm gonna read this quote because it's a quote that means a lot to me. She tells us to be brilliant, right? To be creators of vision, navigators of BS, to be concoctors of opportunity, advocates of culture, defenders of children, to make real the majesty of dreams, to make plain the magic of being, to manifest the difference between perceiving and seeing. For us to fly in leaps and gusts of provocation, instigation, inspiration, and aspiration. To call for and exhibit the high standards of justice, integrity, and kindness to all. Family, our 2020 Randy Martin Spirit Award winner and our cultural matriarch, I give you Carol Frances B. Bell.
Thank you so much, Wood. And thank you, IA. I gotta say that this was really a surprise. When I became a member of the Imagining America board, I really wanted to learn as much as I wanted to contribute. And I was very much moved by the aspiration that Imagining America had, which was to imagine America better than it was. And here we are today with a great need for reimagining. And Imagining America is in place and doing that work. And God knows we need our culture bearers and our creatives at work. And so I thank you twice, because one, for this great distinction, but also to be here to hear from Arlene and from Caron and from Jeff. Because the content of what I've just listened to is really the story and the work plan that we need to be delving into going forward. Our country needs us right now, whether they know it or not. And figuring out how to be able to manage to have that need to be defined in a way that we can manage to respond to it, to make it fertile and invested in. So I look forward to next year and being further connected to Imagining America. And I have loved what you guys have been doing this month. I love this Through Tumultuous Time series that we've done here. And let's all pray that next year we'll be able to be together at the Imagining America gathering. Thank you again.
For sure, because we all want to get a chance to hug you and,
Oh God.
and be in
we
your
have to get lessons on hugging.
and be in your presence.
Yes, I will risk the virus to hug you. Risk
Thank
the
you so
virus.
much. He's also my neighbor, y'all.
Well, I want to just thank everyone. Obviously thank Arlene again, and the fact that she invited two such vibrant panelists, Caron and Jeff. And then obviously, I also want to thank my co-conspirator, Wood, who has been helpful. And I also really want to thank the IA staff who are behind the scenes. They're slightly visible to us, but they're not visible to you. But these things do not happen out of magic and out of the air. Mina, Aaron, Papiro, and of course, Erica. That is a group that's phenomenal, and that's how we've been able to do these many terrific programs over the month, and there's more to come. We're not done yet, but I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and say ashe, ashe.
Ashe. Good
Ashe,
evening.
Ashe-o.